So, I call the meeting of the Farmworker Advisory Committee, Farmworker Resource Program Advisory Committee to order. I don't remember what meeting this is. Is it 7?
No.
6? I don't know. It's a lot.
Maybe the 9 or the 10. Yeah.
May we start with a roll call?
Committee Member Arciniega. Committee Member Barajas.
Here.
Committee Member Murray.
Here.
Committee Member Ospina. Here. Committee Member Pereira.
Here.
Committee Member Solano.
Here.
Co-Chair Brokaw.
Here.
Co-Chair Zucker.
Here.
I am looking at the wrong thing. Here's the agenda. I'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of our last meeting. Do I hear a motion? Moved. Second?
Second.
Any discussion or corrections? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes approved. Last time we had a pretty in-depth discussion of the resolution process. We didn't finish anything, and we had expected to pick it up again this evening. However, Yasel and Jessica are working on the agreements that are described in the resolution in the presentation of resolution options. And they are hoping to have that ready for our next meeting. Dave has some information about the mediation process and also a report on a program in Oregon that does farmworker resolution dispute. And so he's going to share that also at our next meeting. So my suggestion tonight is that we don't go back to those two sections, the resolution, presentation of resolution options and the resolution process, until next week, unless there's anything that the committee is burning to say about it at this point.
I agree with that.
Okay. So I'd like to go through the next sections and one at a time. The first one is program accessibility. Would somebody be willing to read what it says? Yourself, would you do?
Primary location in downtown Oxnard, easily accessible by public transportation. Satellite office in Santa Clara Valley, ideally in Fillmore with office hours once or twice a week. Fillmore is close to Santa Paula and Piru. Hours of operation, Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. with 2 Saturdays per month, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. 24/7 telephone hotline. Explore 211 as an option. Calls received by 211 can be referred to program staff for follow-up. Leveraging this existing resource will help manage program costs. Communication in Mixteco, Spanish, and English fluency.
Thank you. Jessica, we decided to hold any discussion on resolution process guidelines and the option for presentation till our next meeting, when you and Yasel will have your recommendations and Dave will be presenting some information. So we're going on with the next sections, starting with program accessibility.
Okay.
I think we'll start with any public comment that anybody has on this section. We have received some comment before about the importance of having presence in Santa Paula or Fillmore, about having Saturday hours. I think perhaps the language responds to people's concerns, but is there anybody that would like to talk about this item? Wonderful. Oh, please.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Jorge, vengo del proyecto Mixteco Indígena.
Good afternoon, my name is Jorge and I'm from Proyecto Mixteco.
Es importante para nosotros tener una oficina en todos lados donde hay agricultura
It's important for us to have an office everywhere where there's agriculture present,
o alguien que nos ayude,
or someone to help us.
porque no solamente Oxnard, hay campo, hay Fillmore,
Because there's
Morpar,
fields in not only in Oxnard, but Fillmore,
Piro,
Morpar,
mucha gente
Pyro,
viene desde Oxnard y va a trabajar hasta Piro,
and there's people from Oxnard that go to work all the way to Pyro.
Camulos, he trabajado en todas esas
Mamuros,
partes
I work all those
y
places,
el calor es muy fuerte, entonces
and the heat is strong.
todas las personas que trabajamos en esa área ocupamos ese apoyo.
So all of us who work those areas, we need that support.
Y sí nos gustaría que estuviera monitoreando o que gente como los que van a trabajar aquí vayan un día o 2 días allá.
So we would like people like you that are going to help us to be present 1 or 2 days on those areas,
Para tener a alguien con quien acudir allá en esa área.
so we can have someone to go to in those areas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Any committee comments?
I'm good with this language as written.
Just one point I want to clarify. When we say 2 Saturdays, is that in addition to the Monday through Friday, or instead of 1 day a week?
That's a good question. I assume, well, I guess if the person is a salaried position, it might not matter, but if they're hourly, then that raises overtime costs, right? And so eventually they would need to swap out a.
And also to say that once with, I know that the committee's determined that would be, the desire to have that availability. Also, definitely consideration that this is going to be a 2-person operation, and there would have to be some sort of adjustments to allow these people also some time, I'm sure, for personal, events and things. And so it would be something to be worked out with, but we could always have in consideration once we're working the program on how that would be the best way to schedule staff's time.
It's a good point, though, that also because it's a two-person operation, ideally, right? That if say one person needed to take off, Monday in order to work Saturday, there'd still be someone in the office. So someone would come and not find anyone there.
I think there was another public comment. Did you want, lady behind you, yourself? No. Did you want to make a comment?
Okay.
Sí, buenas tardes, mi nombre es Rosario Castañeda
My name is Rosario Castañeda,
y los comentarios del público. Se recomienda que todas las sugerencias, preocupaciones y comentarios públicos se documenten en el sitio del web programa.
And I'm reading what it says about public comments, that it's recommended that, or suggested that all concerns and comments from the public are registered in the web program.
Requisito del programa para el personal, recomendamos que la persona contratada a este programa esté capacitado con experiencia, habilidades.
And the requisites for the staff for this program, it suggests that this person, the one you're going to hire for this program, is trained, has experience, the skills and sensitivity,
Y sensibilidad para tomar casos o reportes de acoso sexual, especialmente para la mujer.
to deal with cases or reports about sexual harassment, especially for the women,
Violencia doméstica
domestic violence,
y abuso sexual,
and sexual abuse,
ya que la mayoría de los casos de abuso son más hacia la mujer.
as most of these cases concern more women, most times.
Se recomienda que la persona contratada sea mujer.
So we're recommending that the person you hire is a woman.
Eso ayudaría a crear confianza,
That would help with trust,
sensibilidad,
sensitivity,
empatía
empathy
hacia la mujer.
towards women. She's going to leave a copy for each of you.
Thank you.
Here, okay.
I wanted to respond to the prior comment about having presence everywhere where farm workers are working. If we were in a perfect world, that would be possible, but we have a budget limit of $200,000, and if we're going to have 2 staff people, which seems necessary, we have to limit the locations. We can't be everywhere all the time. So I hope that the locations we're talking about, Oxnard and Fillmore, will be accessible to everyone, either close to where they're working or close to where they're living.
And one other thing too, also just for those in attendance, with the comments regarding staff availability, there are also labor laws requiring how the process would work. So I know there's preferences to certain genders or, times and things, the amount of time staff can work. So I just want to go on the record that those will also be considered by not only if it's within the county and outside, there's still certain laws that, allow for a fair hiring process.
The suggestion in this section that we work with 211, nice suggestion, but I don't believe we've had any conversation with anyone in that program or explored exactly how that might work. So how could we go about making that, finding out if that is really a feasible
That is something
alternative?
the committee could direct staff, and we would be happy to contact 211 and begin those conversations, and at one of the upcoming meetings, provide that information.
And Ellen and I actually very early on, when this was first, before it was ever passed by the board, we had talked with someone at 211, and I think it was, they were open to, I think, kind of being a referral resource. But I think the important clarification they made with us is they only refer. They couldn't do the intake of someone or something like that. And so I guess my thought with 211 is that there's a benefit to that they have kind of this 24-hour hotline availability. There's kind of a live person, but I also feel like I'm not sure how much it really gets us, because if they only will do referral, then so in one path someone could call 211 and the person at 211 says, oh, okay, you've got a farm worker labor issue, let me refer you to the Farm Worker Resource Program, and then they transfer that person to our our program's phone number. And then it rings, and either that person's there and they pick up, or they're not there and they leave a message, right? If we don't have 211, then the person just calls our number, and either if they're there, they pick up. If they're not there, leaving a message. So to me, it seems like 211 kind of just adds an extra step, but kind of ultimately just arrives at kind of the same outcome. They might be able to get a live person immediately, but if our person is not in the office at that time, all 211 is going to be able to do is kind of refer them to our phone number where they'll have to leave a message anyway.
So let me, I think what we were thinking too is for after hours or a Sunday, for example, if something happens and they just want to make that phone call, they get a live person answering, because in our experience, when they get a voicemail, 99% of the time they won't leave a message. So at least this way we capture their information, and then somebody from our staff or from the program staff can call back and at least be able to reach out to them and make sure that we don't lose that call. So that was the thought about 211, just because if we were to have a hotline, if the program were to have a hotline, then it's an added expense. So the thought was, well, if somebody can answer and at least capture their name, number, and then the program staff can get back to them, the next available day or time.
So are we saying that would be more than what 211 does, right? I mean, we'd be asking them to do something like that, because we had, our agency, the Agricultural Labor Relations Board, had to fill out a form to submit to 211 so that they would know who we are, they would know what we do generally, and then if folks who call have an question regarding that, we would be one of the agencies that they would refer that person to. But I think, if they're just going to give out that referral, like they normally do with all the other referrals, then I think it's what Lucas is saying, right? But what you're saying, Isel, sounds more like a commitment from the person at 211 to take down the information and make sure it gets to the Farmworker Resource Program so that the Farmworker Resource Program could call that person back.
Ideally, yes. I don't know if they would be willing to do that or able to do that. But
If they don't, I don't see any purpose of having 211. If
Right.
they're going to refer them and they're not going to leave that message, why are we, and we're not getting very good bang for the buck.
It's just another outreach tool, the way I see it. I mean, we're going to have the number available at the Farm Bureau, at MyCOP, at community-based organizations, at 211, including 211, right? But I do agree that people don't leave messages. Even people who I work with and I've met in person call and there's just silence on my voicemail, and then they're like, "You didn't answer." I'm like, "Because I was probably on the other line. Leave me a message and I will call you back."
So you don't get a list of for example, we referred these people to your agency. There is no
No,
list
they
like
just give, as far as I know, 211 will just, if they think, like I've said, if you think it's agriculture and it's labor, put us on the list of everyone who you refer them to. I don't think they go very deep, but I've never been a caller myself, so I don't know.
I mean, if you think about
So it's something
what 211 does, it's really about casting a net of giving individuals the option of calling.
Right.
Let's say they haven't heard of the Farmworker Resource Program, but they have heard of 211. There's really no downside as long as there's not a cost to the program, and they have a sheet that tells about what we do and how we go about it. And if we're one of the agencies that they refer people to, then I think it's nothing but benefit to us in this program.
Additional
resource.
What I'm thinking, there's a way, with cell phones, when someone calls, let's say they don't leave a message, but we can see the missed calls, and then that person in the program can return those calls. Yeah, because if we use 211 and only they do the referrals, it's the same thing.
That's what I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
That's actually,
I think another possible plus for 211 is that it probably won't be absolutely clear to people what this program is for, at the beginning at least. And if somebody calls in with a domestic violence problem, 211 could direct them appropriately. they're calling in thinking that we would deal with that problem, and they would get directed to the appropriate help rather than waiting for us to get back to them and then discovering that we deal with workplace issues. So that might be helpful for screening and getting people to the right place.
I do think what Val said is really, really great. I mean, if it was, either a cell phone or a landline that had caller ID, like adding that in here, that we are actually directing staff to call back anyone who calls if they see a missed call and that person didn't leave a message, actually to call that number back. I think that could be really, really helpful.
And a lot of current, phone systems and businesses do have that. If they have the phone number shared, it would appear.
Yeah,
If they're marked private, it
know.
won't.
Right.
But if it does, it'll show you the missed call and it'll show the number. So if they don't leave a message, at least staff could, look at what missed calls, and if there's a phone number, they could at least make an attempt.
And to address your point, it looks like this person will be compiling legal aid resources, and hopefully in as part of that, they may be able to identify different places to send them if they do have a TV issue, or they could even say, well, call 211.
We could refer to 211.
Which is
Kind of a joint
which goes
agreement,
to
right?
Lucas's issue of triple referrals, but I think we risk more maybe losing people if they call 211, then 211 tells them call here, and they might never call, as opposed to them calling, not leaving a voicemail, but leaving the number as a missed call. I think there's a better risk of us maybe being able to call back more people.
Yeah, and I think no matter what, we definitely want to be on 211's list, just as every other agency is, right? And fill out the form that Jessica's talking about that she filled out, and make sure that they're referring people to us and they know what our program is. But I do think that us being able to call back a number that didn't call might, really depend on us having our own phone line that, when people call, we see those missed numbers and we call those numbers back.
Does anybody know what they charge with 211, what the cost is of that?
We don't pay anything.
You don't pay anything for that? Oh.
Just to be on
I
their
thought-
referral
okay.
list.
I didn't realize that.
I know we don't have enough money in the program to have our own hotline.
I was gonna, okay, okay. Right, yeah.
Yeah, we don't pay, but the people going to pay, like, I think 411, we need to pay for some information, or may I run?
You mean as a caller?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Does a
I
caller
don't
pay?
think so. Well, we need to find all these things out.
Then I guess if the committee would like to direct staff,
Yes.
we'd be happy to at least gather that information and present it, if not this next meeting, the following one, depending. Just because the meeting's going to turn around quick, I just want to be realistic as to when we'll get documents from who we're requesting from.
If the program was to be housed at a county agency such as HSA, do they have a 24-hour hotline?
I'm not sure. Oh, Melissa Livingston is here. It would be great if she could come and assist us. That would be great. Thank you, Melissa.
Good evening. We have a 24/7 hotline, but it's for child abuse and adult abuse and neglect specifically, for referrals from law enforcement. So that's the current intended purpose of it. It doesn't mean that we couldn't expand that beyond that, but that's currently what it's for.
Okay.
And just for note, the county does have a agreement with 211. The Human Service Agency does pay for a portion of the cost of running 211. Oh, okay,
So, I'm sorry, Melissa, did you say her name?
Melissa Livingston.
Does that mean through that agreement that all of the offices under HSA are listed for 211 people who pick up the phone to refer callers to? What is that agreement?
211 has a list of contacts, so
Oh,
if it's a homeless issue, they know who the homeless contacts are. If it's a child abuse or neglect issue, they know how to get a hold of the hotline or whoever those resources are. So
Do they actually contact that contact person for the caller, or they give the caller the information to then take the next step in contact?
it depends on what the issue is.
Oh, okay.
So
it's a mixed bag of whether they put the individual in contact with us directly or if they're making an actual referral of other sorts. Won't go into the details of those.
So would that be more kind of like life, death, immediate
Concerns
danger,
about
or
conversations that they've had that they believe need to be, and then we may,
immediately addressed?
may need to do a follow-up.
Okay, all right, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so you have been directed.
All right.
Any other comments on this section? Okay,
I'm sorry, I guess I should say.
I'm sorry, I don't see you.
No, it's okay, I don't want to be turning my head, but I mean, I think the hotline idea is, you know, it's ideal and it could be good, but I think also that if there's not money for it in the budget this year, I think that there's a way for people to, you know, once the information is out there, to contact the office, and it's a very good proactive step, I think, to, you know, strongly suggest that the people returning missed calls. I mean, that's just kind of what you do, that you see on your phone, and then I think that that could be, you know, addressed that way. So the hotline, I don't know, I have, you know, there's some other counties that have done stuff like through volunteer hotlines using, like in the Los Angeles County, they have Empleo, which is like the Mexican consulate partnering with the Catholic Church, partnering with the Department of Labor. And so they have volunteers that are answering calls and making referrals. But they have their own challenges because they're volunteers for the church. They're not there necessarily when people think, you know, call more, like after hours. So there's some challenges with hotlines too, but I think it's something that we should keep in mind to grow into, and hope that we can get to that kind of a system in the county. But I wouldn't place it high on the priorities of the budget kind of that we're working in for this first year.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. You're feeling that the county could use a different or more robust hotline than 211, or that we might want eventually to have our own hotline?
Well, the way that I understand it, so is that 211 is not really a hotline, right? Because when I think of a hotline, I think if somebody calls and they're going to get their issue addressed to a certain degree. And with 211, I see it, the way I understand it right now is that it's more going to make that referral, tell the person, oh, there's this Farmworker resource program, call this number. So a hotline I see more like an intake, a short intake where they're assessing the issue at 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night, or, you know, something that's off hours, that's not the staff person. And then either, you know, saying that this is what the Farmworker resource program is, this is how it can help you, they're open tomorrow at this time, you can go into this office, this is where they're located, and then maybe even a potential follow-up.
Has anyone here ever called 211?
Yes.
And can you tell us, do they talk to you in any depth about what your issue is?
Not really, you know, it's 24 hours, and I have an emergency for.
Can you come up?
Oh. Yeah, that's happened to me in Santa Barbara County. It was in a human trafficking, you know, and I was asking for help and, you know, dealing with too many situations, and no one helped me, you know. I was asking for some, what is it? You know, and a place to stay. What is the
Shelter?
Yeah. And they say, you know what? We don't have nothing. Just call tomorrow. I was asking for too many things in that moment. I don't remember very well. And my experience was highly negative. So it doesn't matter what kind of emergency I have.
So if you need immediate help,
is not too good.
you needed immediate help, and
Yes.
that wasn't
Uh-huh.
available.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, let's still explore what they do.
Was there another comment? There was another comment.
Lo que yo entiendo con el 211
What I understand from 211
es que esa línea refiere al problema a una agencia, ¿verdad?
is that they refer you to an agency to take care of that issue, whatever that is.
Y este programa está hecho especialmente para los trabajadores del campo,
And this program is for workers, for farm workers,
donde el 70% son indígenas
where
y el
70%
50%
of them are indigenous,
hablan un idioma indígena.
and 50% of them speak a different language.
¿Qué va a pasar cuando un indígena como yo,
What's
que
going
hablo
to happen
mixteco,
with someone like me who speaks Mixteco,
hable yo al 211?
calls 211?
No me van a entender
They won't understand me
porque hablo una lengua indígena.
because I speak Mixteco.
En esta sala hay muchos compañeros que
No.
solamente entienden español.
And right now in this room there's a lot of people who only understand Spanish, a lot of my colleagues,
Pero no hablan, no pueden tener una conversación al español.
so they cannot hold a conversation in Spanish.
Entonces, este programa está hecho para los trabajadores.
So
Entonces,
this program is for farm workers.
para mí, en lo personal, mi punto de vista,
So my point of view, my personal point
no
of
va a
view,
funcionar el 211.
I don't think 211 is going to work.
Aparte, si vamos a pagar o van a pagar por el servicio,
And besides, if we have to pay or you're going to pay for the service,
no va a funcionar para mí.
it's not
en
going
mi
to
punto
work.
de vista.
That's my point of view.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those are the questions we'll be asking. My understanding is that we don't have to pay, and that they do provide, are able to respond in all the languages that are commonly spoken in this county. But how they do that, I don't know, and we will find out.
It'd be important to know if, for example, they do have Mixteco speaking staff at 211, or if it's kind of, I know sometimes with referral, it's like, okay, we can call a translator to speak Tagalog or something, right?
Right.
But hold on for 5 minutes while I get a translator, right? And that sometimes you lose someone in there. So it would be great to figure out if they have someone just regularly available with Mixteco, or if they have to contact them.
All right, we have some questions to pursue. So as we have been doing, we won't make any final decision about this or anything else, and move on to the next section, which is program, home agency, and staff requirements. Jessica, would you be willing to read this one?
Sure. Okay, just the bullets that are under there. Okay, program home agency must have adequate space to include reception and 2 dedicated private rooms. Program home agency must have the resources to provide administrative support. 2 full-time staff members on payroll or contract required with the following skills: knowledge and experience of the agricultural industry and issues required, knowledge of agricultural labor laws, knowledge of local and state agencies, organizations dealing with labor issues, mediation skills, fluency in Mixteco, San Martin Peras preferred Spanish and English, ability to establish and maintain effective relationships with farm workers, employers, farmers, advocates, and outside agencies, excellent communication skills including written, verbal, listening, and presentation, and must have insured vehicle and California driver's license.
All right. The two parts to this section. One is, where is this program going to be housed? And the other is, what are the staff requirements going to be? So let's have any comments from the public on either of those that you would like to share now. Okay.
And I guess maybe for folks in terms of agency being housed, that's kind of where, is this in the government agency, like in, HSA, which is the agency where you go for, Medi-Cal and, and CalFresh and stuff like that, right? Or in a nonprofit, we talked about Community Action of Ventura County, could be another nonprofit. So if folks are wondering what that means.
Okay, let's, us at the table here discuss it, and if anybody wants to say something as we're doing this, it's fine. Just put your hand up. We had a presentation from HSA, seems like years ago. And we have talked about making visits to several locations. And I guess the time is here that we need to get serious about that. So Rosa, I think you had some thoughts about how we might organize ourselves to either have some people come to present to us or to go out and visit, or both.
Right, and so we, last left, I think we were just kind of getting a little bit more to this structure of how the committee saw the program, which would assist those such as community action, who I believe you requested to also come and make a presentation, so they have a better understanding if it's something that they can do, and if so, how would it work within, under their roof. We did have our Human Services Agency make a presentation early on at the beginning of stages of when we were meeting, but they have been well represented by Melissa Livingston and other staff members this entire time, and also, so one thing that we could always do also is maybe have them answer some more questions or, clarification now that there's been a little bit more defined as far as the structure of the program. So with community action, I've been in contact with Cinder, and she said that she was willing to come and make a presentation, a quick presentation similar to that of Human Services, and answer questions of this committee. That we were just holding off to either one of the next two meetings, just again to see how far we got into detail about the program structure. And then also, if the committee wishes to visit the locations, I believe we had mentioned visiting community action, and then there was the Vanguard location and also the America's Jobs Center, both in Oxnard, just so that we get a visual and understanding of the space and that the resources available at each location, since they do vary. The Vanguard location from the Job Center, they have also different on-site agencies there. So I know there was a discussion about what could be the benefits to some and others, and also the same with the location. So what we could do is schedule, I would say possibly to have Cinder first see about what community action can provide would probably be best, and in that way, if your committee decides to want to take a field trip and go see the locations in person, then we could schedule that, again, based on the committee's availability. We could go, I know there's talk that some of you might not be able to make it, but felt confident that those committee members representing would be, they felt comfortable with their decision. So we're very flexible, possible with whatever the committee would like to do.
One question we haven't addressed is where are we going to be in Fillmore?
That was, are there potential sites that we can look at over there as far as in regards to our satellite office?
Right.
What you can think of?
And so what we will do is work with the real estate department in the county and just try to locate what county facilities we have out there, because maybe if it's not a specific agency like Human Services, if they don't have it, maybe healthcare or somebody does, and we could rent room or space from there. As far as community action, I don't know what their availability as far as countywide offices would go, but that would be something for Cinder to definitely relay when she comes and makes a presentation, if your committee so would like to have community action make a presentation.
And I remember from the HSA presentation, we did have some sort of Moore Park and Fillmore offices, so maybe the person who comes to present, if they could be familiar with those spaces as well, that way we could ask them.
Oh, from the county?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And I think, yeah, if I remember right, they did have one in Fillmore, but if it was in Santa Paula, I think Santa Paula would be okay too. I think it was just important to have something in the Santa Clara Valley. Fillmore preferred because it's kind of deeper into the Santa Clara Valley, but I think, people from Fillmore and Piru come to Santa Paula all the time just because there are so few resources out there in that, that more rural area. And so I think many people from Fillmore and Piru are kind of, used to coming to Santa Paula for things, so.
Thank you. Thank you.
I looked a little bit back at the notes from the Human Services Agency presentation, and it's almost seems as though we need to hear it all over again, at least that's how it struck me. However, it would take a lot of our time. I wonder if it's possible to focus a little bit on what our questions would be about HSA. And maybe one of us could review that material and try to come up with some questions to run by the rest of us. I know I was concerned about the hiring process that would be required, certain rigidity in the requirements that might make it difficult for us to achieve what we want to. But I think others of you thought it would be fine. So are any of you prepared to do any of you remember enough of what was said to discuss that now?
What I remember was more, and this may just because my memory is limited about it, but I remember it being more about, or maybe this is how I think it should be, its own separate staff and office, right? Not supervised by HSA. So from my recollection, the conversation was more about the space and the availability of space. So does it have this, like the first two bullets here that talk about the home agency, does it have like the privacy, where we could have, workers and employer representatives meeting to resolve the disputes? Does it have like a reception area for its own kind of intake or own staff person to meet with people to gather information? I don't think that we discussed I know in the presentation from one of the county labor departments, it talked about it needs to be housed in an agency.
Right, it could
fall
not
under
be
like a
its own
program.
separate, it would have to fall exactly in an agency under program, and it would have, based on the structure, would have some supervision, but obviously still have, they would function based on the way that the program is structured, but they would have to be supervised. They wouldn't be kind of their own separate thing under the county. They would have to work under an agency.
Okay.
And I remember in our subcommittee, we wondered if the executive office of your office is an agency it could be housed under, or is it not an option?
Under ours, it would be, it could be something we could look at if it's for it to fall under the county executive office. But the county executive office, I think the reason Human Services, early on we had the discussion, it was ideal was because of the knowledge and the ability to kind of work across with other available resources. There was like housing, CalFresh and all these other programs, and it kind of naturally fit in there, the work that the staff was going to be doing. I believe Sean Aten had recommended, it felt definitely after their review what it was early on, the way that we were describing it, the committee described it. That looked like that was kind of the area it should fall under, the job classification and under the agency that we would, and again, the availability to the resources and just the nature of that agency and the work they do with individuals.
So if it was in the executive office, it couldn't be housed physically in an HSA space?
It would get a little complicated. It would have to be kind of like renting space from another agency. Right. So it gets a little, everybody has their own budget and you start having to rent a room.
So if it's housed at HSA, there's not a rent portion that needs
No,
to be paid?
No, but still, there's still, unfortunately Alejandra is not here today. She is the one that is kind of put the budget part to this program together, especially if it falls under the county. So she was going to look into the costs I mean, it definitely all has a lot of, it'll have overhead costs, equipment, computer, all these things that come into place. It's easier when it falls under there and how it is budgeted within which department or where it's working on. And that's something that she could provide the specifics for, I would say, maybe at the next meeting a little bit more, now that we really have determined a little bit more about the program and what you want, but she could provide a lot more specifics to that.
Because
There'll definitely be a cost, regardless of the locations of where we go.
Yeah. What I remember from the tie-in to the HSA was more like the location, because people are familiar because they may already be using those services. But I don't necessarily see like the Farm Worker Resource Program, yes, having a list of other potential agencies or offices, community-based organizations. We even talked about referral to legal services. But I do want to put out for consideration that this program was developed specifically in regards to working conditions and addressing disputes at the workplace. And so I think that the relation to the HSA services was more about the familiarity, from what I understood, with the location, because people may go there already for other types of services. But I guess in my mind, I don't see the two as the same. Like that it's like a service, like an HSA service.
And it was also, it's important to remember that there was, what does the farm worker need? Aside from the labor issues, there are other areas in which we found that, say like the Mixteco community have a bit of a problem getting maybe the available resources to assist them within navigate through all these other areas. So although there are some services through HSA that there was a benefit. I remember early on in the discussion that there was a benefit to that, and also the familiarity to some staff members that already work out in the community and having that relationship with the community has with farm workers and that knowledge. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at it as a broad and not too direct into maybe labor issues or complaints. That this is a resource center to assist them just with them in the county in general. I mean, that was a huge discussion, was to attract workers, that this is an ideal place to work and live. And that's expanding on those other areas aside from just the work issues that are happening. It's how else can we, assist them as a whole in their life. Because I remember there was also education, there was a few things about schooling, and there was a lot of various discussion about just needing that assistance in navigating through all the various things one has in their daily life.
And I think as Jessica kind of alluded to, I think the reason, the primary reason I think for HSA is that it's a place that so many of our farm worker community are already familiar with. Going for CalFresh, going for Medi-Cal, right? And in terms of wanting an agency that people kind of know where it's at, feel comfortable going in the doors, right? Are not worried, okay, this is this scary new thing I haven't heard of, right? Can I trust it? It being located at somewhere somebody's already been, they've gone with their family to get help and have gotten it before, I think is really, really valuable. It's invaluable. And that's something that can't be replaced, right? I think so to me, HSA is ideal for that reason, right? And it's also because I think the government agency really adds a value in terms of, being a kind of a neutral party, right? I think the questions that I remember came up around HSA, I mean, if I remember the presentation, it seemed like most folks at the table, at least in theory, liked HSA as kind of an ideal place, but there were three questions that I remember that we kind of couldn't immediately answer, that I think we want to get an answer to before we commit to something like HSA. One was around costs and the full costs of it being a government agency versus a nonprofit, and we know that is a little more expensive, right? And so that's something to think about, and then understanding how much overhead costs would be in kind of addition to that. I think hopefully there could be some creative solutions, and and we can make it work. But that's the first consideration. I think the second is space. We knew that office existed, at the downtown Oxnard location. I think that was what most people preferred at that last meeting, but does that office actually have space available? And that was something that I think at the time we weren't able to answer. And then third was the timing of if we want someone to work from 11 to 7. I mean, are the doors kind of shut and locked after 5? Is it possible to have just one person in the office late?
Right, and that could, at least if I could speak for it being at a government facility, we could always work with the security that's contracted for that facility to be open and understand, and if anything, even assist in, guiding them to where the office is and those types of things. So that shouldn't be much of a problem in trying to figure out exactly how we could make that work.
Great,
It
super
would be
helpful.
good to understand if that's an additional cost, if the security has to stay there.
What was that?
Yeah.
You can-
I think I might be able to answer a lot of your questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being here.
Just waiting to hear them all. First off, on cost, obviously we would be able to look into the opportunities and options there, but currently the way costs are handled is that anyone who resides in our facility pays a certain percentage of the facility's costs, and those are apportioned out by a cost methodology sharing. So any partner who's currently in our facility provides, is required to pay a certain cost, but then we also have opportunities through in-kind matches of the work that people are doing and the value of the work that they're doing, that through our cost-sharing agreements, we may be able to get waivers where we don't have to actually spend people's dollars in order to support that. So there's opportunities there, and there's precedence that's already been established with that. Overhead, if services were being used, as you discussed about the need for administrative support and things that may happen because you have two resources and you need more support to support the day-to-day. We do also have overhead costs that are shared across our organization through a cost-sharing methodology also. And we would look at that and the value of those in return for the value of the service that was being provided within the facility. And then as it relates to timing, we currently have security guards. The Vanguard facility specifically, because it houses our children and family services, social workers, is open much later for those social workers returning back into the field often very late at night. So we do have security for an extended period of time at that facility. And most of our facilities, we have been working toward extending our hours between normal work hours of 8 to 5 to have longer availability, and so security guards have been traditionally used and sometimes are on premise after we leave place. So hopefully that answers some of your questions about some of the things that we have in the service agency.
Thank you,
That
Melissa.
is very helpful. Thanks so much, Melissa.
Great.
And do you know by any chance about the Vanguard facility? There are any?
We have space. We have a little bit of space in all of our facilities. It just means it's creating a flow that makes sense. All of our facilities have major reception areas as you come in, and then the clients are diverted to wherever they are going to see a worker in different interview rooms. We would have to maybe do some floor plan layout changes in order to accommodate that, and sometimes costs are associated with that. So we would have to look at each facility. We have a facility in Fillmore, and we also have this facility in Santa Paula, and then of course two in Oxnard. So we would have to look at each facility, and I think a site visit would be appropriate to really envision what it is you're looking for and how we could support that.
Thank you so much.
Don't go. What all partners are at the Vanguard facility?
The Vanguard facility right now, I think the only core partner is our CDR, Child Development Resources for childcare support. The facilities where we have most of our partners are at the America's Job Centers, where we actually have our Employment Development Department and Department of Rehab and a number of other partners who come in to provide support in our one-stop operation. Behavioral health partners do come into those facilities also. Our Santa Paula Main Street facility in Santa Paula has our behavioral health department embedded also with us there. Not all of our partners are there each day of the week. Sometimes we have a space where they come and interact based on the business that they're attending to.
And then can you give a little bit more detail or explanation about the in-kind cost opportunities? I think you
I know
called
you would
them?
be interested in that.
I don't know what it means.
Anytime we have we've had partners that have come into our facilities and we have not charged them any of the lease cost fees because of the value of the services they're providing within the facility that benefit the clients at large.
Okay.
And so somebody who's helping us case manage, for instance, an individual that's addressing many issues and addressing barriers potentially to their self-sufficiency would be recognized as somebody who would be benefiting the entire holistic support of the client themselves. And so in those instances, we have, through sharing agreements, been able to waive those fees. We are audited by the feds and the state on those, and so we would have to have proper agreements and show the value of those services that would be provided.
When are the value of the when are the determinations made in regards to the values of the services that we provide?
Sorry, could you speak to the microphone?
What are the what's the when are those determinations made in regards to the value of the program as far as in kind?
That would be part of the sharing agreement, and actually really sitting down and understanding what would be happening in the facility and how that values clients that are served within our facility, or issues that are happening in our community that we would be involved in to some degree, either at the front end or at some point along the line. It's not clear cut.
Right.
So,
Right.
You mentioned that at the Vanguard location, there's a little bit of a later maybe schedule. Do you know what that is exactly? How late?
It's past 7 o'clock.
Okay.
And then we often are in on the weekends also doing work. We don't schedule work every single weekend, but we do. Vanguard is one of our highest volume offices, so we're often there having staff on site and having security present during that period of time. So.
Okay, and so like if this program needed access on the weekend, I work for a state agency in a building where there's 2 or 3 other state agencies, but we all have our own access key cards, and I can just go and work there on the weekend when I want. I can schedule people to come and meet me there. Would this be similar to that, or would they have to have like a authorized supervisor of the HSA program allow them to have people come in on the weekend and set only certain hours and meet with them?
Currently, the only individuals that would have access, for instance, to Vanguard have a county badge. They have been cleared through the county to have the right to access the facility. And typically, our managements, if there's a management staff person on board, and I believe one of the positions was management level that you might have been looking at, we don't require supervision of a manager in the workplace, where we would if it was a county employee of an individual that was non-represented, or represented, that they would have to have supervision.
Is that like a safety issue, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Just curious.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the work you do around the clock in our community.
The other questions that I had, in addition to what Lucas has mentioned, had to do with how this new innovative program that we are creating would be implemented within the structure of HSA. How would we fit into the hiring categories? how would we have input into the hiring process? I think we ourselves haven't begun to talk about this. We know we're in charge of planning this program. It also says we're in charge of creating it. I think that might mean implementing it, but I'm not sure, and then monitoring it. But how are we going to do that, and how much can we do, and are we going to be supervising? If we are housed in HSA, I think we'll have less, we won't be able to be as nimble about adjusting the program and tweaking and addressing things that are bound to come up as in this brand new endeavor. On the other hand, it might give us support that we can't provide. So those are things I'm worrying about.
And I think that's why when Sean Onson made his presentation and they really looked at the way this program, what the purpose was, and they were able to they did a study into the jobs, and again, it fell under HSA, and they found the job classifications. And so I'm trying to find them in my binder here. What he recommended was in an area where staff is experienced in these types of dealings. So I just want to make sure that the community knows that although you are, structuring and helping with this program, you will have qualified professional staff that will also have the ability to look at areas and know how to work and, I'm sure on their own adjust on how the program as it's building, since it is something new and they're moving along where they need to maybe focus some more, such as outreach or whatever. And trusting, I think, the staff members that are hired through the process. I mean, we do have a pretty structured hiring process, but that's only to guarantee and ensure that the right person is hired for that position. So I just want to make sure you guys have confidence in the hiring process with the county, and also the staff that is hired and within the agency, such as Human Services. I mean, they really do, as you hear, and I don't know to the full extent the amazing work that Human Services does, but that they will be able to structure this program as it's growing, and then work to make it the best that it can for the workers that come in needing assistance.
It's not that I don't distrust them at all. I'm just aware that this is something different, and it's really important that it gets started right. And if what you say is correct, Rosa, then being an HSA would be a great advantage to us.
Right.
And so I think we need to come back to the hiring process and the jobs categories. And we also, we need to keep being mindful of our financial restrictions. And really need pretty soon to get a budget that will show us, because I have a feeling that going with HSA is going to be more expensive, but that maybe we get what we need more. So
Ellen, just
a lot of
real quick,
questions.
a couple thoughts come to mind as we talk about these two pieces of the program that are in my mind probably the most important pieces due to the budgetary constraints that we face. I think we can, one of the things we have to start preparing for is a messaging campaign around the fact that this program is about, in my mind, fulfilling the county's obligation to provide services for, you could argue, a somewhat disenfranchised area of the population, right, with the indigenous workforce, given the language constraints. That's one piece. But also, I think you could argue that this program, if done correctly, could also serve to reduce cost within other county agencies, as suggested. And I think those two pieces are important, because if you look at this in terms of the face value of the costs that are going to be required. I'm just running rough numbers in my head. I mean, I think it would be easy to reach $500,000 a year in just what we've suggested with 2 positions at HSA, with two buildings, with the overhead associated with that, office hours, with all the requirements that we're asking this person or these 2 people to have. So I think we have to either, one, message this differently and try to get more money through creative means by reducing cost and or providing more resources, or we have to start getting realistic about what we can do with $200,000. I think we can do a little bit of both, but that's where the real rubber's going to hit the road in this program, in my view. And to your point, Ellen, we also don't want to, I think what you're saying, and I agree with, is that we don't want to create something that loses its way over time. It's important that we keep this moving forward in the right direction in terms of its service to farm workers, in my mind, especially indigenous farm workers, which, to Juvenal's point, represent 70% of the population.
Can we see a draft budget maybe by the next meeting?
Right, I will make sure that with Alejandra Reyes tomorrow, that we start getting that worked out. And then also have, again, a representative from our human resources. You know, they made that presentation. I just found, I believe they, it has been a long time. And they, again, I know it's hard to remember something that we heard early on, now that we've really defined a lot of the program itself. So I'll make sure that to have Alejandra provided more information about that and incorporating the information that Sean Otten made and his presentation regarding the 2 job classifications that he had recommended to staff the program. I think that would be helpful to have that visual and writing and the location. But also, another thing to remember is we don't know what if it's housed outside. I don't know if they're also, how much of what we're defining they're going to be able to also provide. That's another thing to remember. I mean, just as a whole, as a program, if it's housed in the county or outside.
We have 2, we already have programs, home agency requirements. Can we narrow this down to 2 locations possibly at our next presentation and get a budget put together and find out what this thing's going to cost, so we know what we have to work with, and give us a starting point, and if it's, and so we know realistically where we can make this happen or not.
Right.
I have no idea. I mean, I agree with Dave. What we're talking about here is a lot more than $200,000
Right.
and we need to start getting some numbers and start figuring out what we have to work with.
Absolutely. As far as the county side, we could definitely start working, again, with all of our representatives to provide that information and gather in time for the next meeting. That should be no problem, since we've already had a lot of discussion in these meetings to just kind of compile it and put it all together.
Thanks so much. Some thoughts that I had around cost. I guess first off is, you know, as folks have said, you know, at the end of the day, you get what you pay for, right? You know, if county pays more than nonprofit, it's also county is able to attract, you know, a higher quality person because the compensation is better, right? If the overhead is higher because it's using a great HSA facility that's in the community that, you know, that people know and go to, and, you know, has security around the clock and all that, you know, it's also because we're getting that. But at the end of the day, we have a very real budget constraint. So some potential thoughts on solutions. You know, one, we could go back. I mean, ultimately, this is going to go back to the supervisors, and it takes a 4 out of 5 vote instead of a 3 out of 5 vote, which we only had a 3 out of 5 vote to pass this. But potentially, you know, to change a budget middle of the budget year, right? Take a 4 out of 5. I don't know how the budget is looking now, you know, as we're a few months into the year, but that's one possibility. Another possibility is private funding. You know, there are private foundations out there that fund kind of workers' rights initiatives, and you know, that the kind of foundations that you know, organizations like Cause, you know, and MyCop apply for grants to, right? You know, the county or kind of one of our organizations could try to seek that kind of private private grant funding, potentially that could be, matched. It could be a little bit from a foundation that supports workers' rights initiatives and a little bit from the ag industry, and then there's kind of a balance, politically, right? And that could kind of supplement if we need that boost. Another option on the cost saving side versus the increasing revenue side could be potentially, rather than having kind of the choice, we're looking at the choice of kind of two people in government versus contract to a nonprofit. Could be one person in government, and then the kind of the outreach. We've talked about kind of the mediation side, right, and kind of the outreach side. The mediation side, I think, has a real huge value in being in government, in that it's kind of it's a neutral party. It's also, that person, we are kind of looking for, a decent level of technical skill in terms of knowledge of labor law and things like that, right? That person could theoretically be in government, and the outreach side could be contracted to a nonprofit, and that might be a way to kind of cut down the costs on that end. So just throwing those ideas out there.
I think that's what we're going to have to do, Lucas. Think creatively.
All three of those things.
Rosa, do you know when they're going to be putting together this potential budget? Will they be looking at the job descriptions that they provided, or coming up? Because I remember he talked about potentially creating a new job description.
Right, and that would be a study that they would have to do, is possibly create one. Is always an option. There's some that are existing, and then one which would be creating a job position or two for this. And so, if I know he broke down some numbers from last time, but when we work on this budget, we'll work again with human resources, kind of giving an estimate about where they feel the job classification will fall, because we do have specialists. That's what they do. It's really technical, for someone like myself, or any of us, to just be like, oh, it's going to be this one, or just for this range. So I know he had John Knitsky here, who was the person that would be looking into it. So we'll work with them and incorporate into this next budget information that we will present at the next meeting.
So including potentially starting to look at drafting a new one, or just based on existing job descriptions?
Both. We'll see both. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, both. Because there's the existing, and I know there was, but then it was like, well, as this grew, what other areas would it be, and if it was going to be tailored for this. So we'll make sure if there's something that looks like it exists, because I think that's what he presented last time. There was a program administrator 2 and an administrative aid position that he was kind of basing it off of, but then there was the recommendation of, for this program, there was always that option of creating a new position, and he explained that process of it going through the board's approval, because again, we do have the civil service process where we have the job classifications established, and when one is created new, it does have to go to the board for approval. But we will look at both. I mean, the creation of one might be a little bit more of a estimate, just because obviously it's not an existing position, but looking at the others, at least we'll have some sort of a position range.
So when we first had that presentation from County HR, there of course you all didn't have enough information from us to be able to kind of write new job descriptions. We could only look at existing. Is this that we've kind of worked on over the past few months? Is this kind of enough information for HR to be able to create new, or is there still more information you need from us?
I mean, I think this is a lot. It's very helpful compared to before. We were just kind of like, oh, this is what we're thinking, Yeah, exactly. So I think this is good where it's at for now, and if anything, if it looks like there might be some more, I think this is sufficient. I think we've gone into really good detail about the program and staffing and the hours and, the desires for these staff members. What they will be doing. So I think that would be good enough for now, that again, with it, John could kind of compare it to other positions, and then again, start really seeing which is the better fitting one. If maybe it's still the same two that they think, maybe it's not much of a change. know that, and they think they can make it work within the existing positions, or if it does look like it's a creation, they could always kind of maybe look at others, kind of, take pieces from and see their salary range and kind of give an estimate about what they believe it might be. Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, we haven't, we've defined the role of the main person involved, but I guess the other staff person, the outreach person, or what, I don't think we've really defined roles of both staff members
And
specifically.
I didn't realize that we were thinking of them having those distinct roles. I thought,
Are we, with that being said, Alan, we're looking for two people with these qualifications?
yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay.
I guess I had always thought that it would be unlikely that we would get two people with all of those qualifications,
Right.
and it's more like you could almost imagine a Venn diagram, right? Some of
Between
them have,
them.
between them together, they've got all those qualifications. We're probably not going to find someone who,
there was
speaks
one-
3 languages and has labor law experience and, ag
Right.
experience.
Right, that's,
So we need to be sure that job description has all that's required to both do the resolution process and outreach. So are we ready to move on to the job description?
Yeah.
Okay. Who that I haven't victimized yet would like to read this?
I'll be your victim this time.
Okay.
So am I reading the bullet point that,
The two full-time staff members.
yeah, the two
Oh,
full-
I think I read that.
You read that?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't read it again.
Did we have any edits on that or any?
We've heard a lot about the need for sensitivity to issues of sexual harassment, and I think we need something in there that speaks to that. I haven't thought about the wording.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. I was thinking, along the lines of, the third to last one, where it speaks to the ability to do certain things, right? I think also, maybe a different bullet point or attached to that one, the ability to have sensitivity towards issues of sexual harassment and also discrimination, just like, dealing with comments and situations that are very sensitive and can bring up trauma in people who have been victimized. I don't know if that's helpful. That's also kind of vague.
Do we want someone that has experience in dealing with sensitive issues?
Or just sensitivity to those issues?
Maybe we could call it competency in working with
Sensitive issues.
Because I think that can also be something that they can potentially be trained on, right? I don't know, they don't always have to come with complete competency, right? Maybe if they are familiar with, like they've worked with a certain kind of community, so they have a certain understanding, okay, these are situations that can happen, but then they go to some more training to understand more, maybe specifically, okay, in the indigenous community, this is what we see, or with sexual harassment, this is what tends to happen. So maybe leave it open so that we don't expect them to necessarily come to the table fully armed.
So in terms of wording of a bullet we could add, so something like competency in working with sensitive issues such as sexual harassment.
Yeah, and I think she's
Oh.
putting some words together.
Or be a separate
I feel
bullet
like it's
point.
almost as its own bullet point.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of working with, you could say addressing. People like that? Okay. other comments about what we have there or what we're missing?
You know, the bullet point about fluency in Mixteco, Spanish and English, I absolutely agree with the spirit of that point. My concern would be that as we write this down and put it as a point on the job description matrix, that may be very limiting in and of itself on who would be qualified to do that job, right? We're starting to get into Superman or Superwoman at this point, right? And, you know, I'm not sure how we word that, but it could also be accomplished in other ways, right? Through having translation or contracting with MyCop to help with that aspect of what we're after. My only concern would be making that too limiting.
I think we can say preferred,
Yeah.
and that way it doesn't disqualify anybody from.
Maybe we can detail like fluency in Mixteco and Spanish, or Mixteco English, or Spanish English.
So we could say two or
Bilingual, not trilingual.
But we need to be very clear that we need Mixteco.
Yeah, because I do think it's. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it could be Mixteco English or only Mixteco Spanish.
I do think the program is going to fail if we don't have some Mixteco capacity within the program.
Yeah, I
Right?
agree.
It could be that there's, one. I think only one of the two people needs to speak Mixteco, right? And that would probably be the kind of outreach person. And potentially, I suggest the possibility of having one, county staff member, and then you would contract with a nonprofit, and that person, they would hire someone who speaks Mixteco, right? But I think it's got to be kind of within the program. I think if we're having to kind of contract out for interpreters all the time, I think that's going to be harder. I think we want someone to be able to pick up the phone and talk to Mixteco, right? And if somebody.
My concern is more one of the restrictive. I don't fully understand the county hiring process, but my guess is it's a lot more restrictive than it would be as an individual company. So if we just need to consider that as that goes out in terms of a call for applicants.
Right.
That we may not be able to adjust the way we think we can as individual organizations or companies, right? Because the county may be more restrictive.
And I think in previous conversations, if I recall, we did say that the goal was to at least have one of the staff members have Mixteco, and that's why there was two different job classifications. And using that, such as knowing Mixteco, we could always or prefer if they speak Mixteco, could be part of the job classification. So at least it doesn't then exclude someone that is qualified to come in, say for a job, but maybe for one of the roles doesn't speak Mixteco, but maybe you have someone in the other one that does speak Mixteco but can't come in on another job classification, then at least we have someone on hand. So that was kind of, I think, the way that we were all hoping this hiring process will go.
Right.
Can we change that to say at least one staff person fluent in Mixteco? So then we're indicating that, of the two, that at least one should or must or shall, I don't know.
And similarly, I would say, yeah.
I think it's a must too.
And similarly, I would say bullet points 2 through 4, knowledge of labor laws, knowledge of agencies, and mediation skills. Those probably only need to be one person as well. I think I kind of was writing 1 and 2 next to things on my little sheet that the kind of person who more specializes on the outreach side needs to be fluent in Mixteco. The person who's more the mediator, I think, is the one who needs to kind of have the knowledge of kind of navigating the labor agencies and have the mediation skills. And I don't think that the other person necessarily has to have that. If there's someone from the Mixteco community in Ventura County who has worked in the fields themselves ideally and kind of is embedded within that community, but they don't have kind of that technical labor law, I think that person would do a fantastic job at that.
I would actually think the reverse, Lucas. I think it would be more important to have the Mixteco language skill in the dispute resolution process. If in the outreach you can have somebody translate, but in the give and take of facilitating resolution, you need to be able to really understand the person that you're there with. And I would reverse it.
Well, I would hope both staff members could be there during that kind of dispute resolution process to be able to have that conversation. I just think it might, the pool of folks who speak Mixteco and have kind of knowledge of labor law and labor agencies is probably pretty small, and they probably all already work for MICOM.
This is maybe another point or argument for not going with the county, where we would have to have two clear job descriptions. If we were more independently hiring, we could adjust according to the people we find to make sure we've covered it all, but it would give us more flexibility.
The way we're talking, it seems like we almost need to establish two sets of job requirements for two separate staff members. I mean, one that has knowledge and experience of the agriculture industry, knowledge of labor laws, knowledge of local and state agencies. That's one staff member. Then the other one is, fluency in Mixteco, mediation skills, and all that. Almost looks like we need to establish two separate
And just to
job
clarify,
requirements.
within it, it's not as rigid, I'm thinking that you guys might think. We could have these desired areas. So in the job itself, it's going to be one of those things where we have the requirements, obviously, to know that they do fit this job role, and then the desired. And then those that have the desired areas, such as Mixteco and all the other areas that we're discussing, those are the ones that kind of, rise to the top in the screening process. So I don't want you to think that that excludes it and it has to rewrite two separate ones. We could still include some language within both of them, because maybe we can find two unicorns. We can find them, So we could always still have that language within there. And again, human resources taking, all this that has been defined, they will make sure that it's tailored for that specific reason in the employee's, job classification. So
That's great.
And I think we don't know what this would look like with a nonprofit, right? So potentially we might not have any control over the job description there either. I think we can't assume it would be any better there, and that we would be able, potentially with a nonprofit, they might not be as familiar with labor law either. So how will they hire someone and recognize who has knowledge? I think we just have to be aware there might be weaknesses down that way as well. And also, honestly, if it's at the county and they're getting offered to be paid more, we're more likely to find that unicorn than to offer someone a one-year position at a nonprofit for a lower salary.
Maybe there's people who work in nonprofits that might like a better salary and benefits working in the county.
Well, you certainly need to have some conversation with Community Action. My understanding from just talking initially was that they would be happy to house and support us, but we could define and pay and do it all any way we like. But they have been waiting to hear more of what the program is and what we would like from them. So I think, Rosa, it'd be helpful to give them more information about what...
Community Action?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I've been in communication with Cinder, and I told her this has been a little bit more solidified as you're moving along. We would give them the materials for that same reason.
So she really, when she comes to talk to us, has a little better idea of what it is that we are trying to do. Okay.
Yeah, and potentially we might want to come up with what our questions would be for, for Community Action in advance. Or, one thought that comes to, we've talked about, for example, county having overhead costs. Of course, nonprofits have overhead costs too, right?
Yes.
So it's really the same. County might have higher overhead costs, but it might be because we're getting higher quality administrative support and facilities.
And I think we should also determine if there are any other nonprofits we want to talk to, because we haven't really made the decision that that would be the best nonprofit.
I think
To
we
house
just
the
haven't come
program?
up with any other names, and
I
if
think
we're
we
going
do.
to, we better do it fast.
We had mentioned El Concilio, but nobody has talked to them, or, I know in our small group, we mentioned that as a potential, but I don't think anybody has reached out to them.
I mean, I think to me, elephant in the room is that the best nonprofit to do this would be BICOP, in terms of competency and, already existing relationships in the farm worker community. If this was, there were no politics involved and the county was just to put out, an RFP and, every nonprofit in the county applied for it, BICOP would clear it away and just crush the competition, right? In terms of qualifications for doing something like this. But the question would be, would that be acceptable if we were to contract out to a nonprofit and BICOP was the most qualified nonprofit? Would that be acceptable to that community, right? Or would growers see that as? I mean, I think I'll speak for maybe we might be more negatively viewed by as caused by some of that community than BICOP is, but I don't know.
I think it is so important that this is perceived as we intend it to be, as something to benefit both employers and workers. That being in a more neutral agency is essential, although I agree with you that MyCop would be very well positioned to handle it. We have a gentleman here who just went to sleep. Would you like to speak?
Estoy escuchando que quieren contratar a una persona capaz en los 4 idiomas, en los 3 idiomas, ¿verdad?
I'm listening that you want to hire someone that has knowledge or is competent in these 2 or 3 languages.
En mi experiencia también como soy intérprete,
I'm an interpreter too, so I'm talking of my experience.
entonces quiero que el programa quede en el condado.
I want this
Quiero que
program to
las
be in
personas
the
que
county.
trabajen o que estén trabajando para este programa
I want
sean
the
del condado.
people who are going to work for this program are from the county.
Porque si contamos una agencia de intérpretes, van a venir en otros condados que no
Because
sean
if we
aquí.
hire interpreters from other places, they're not going to be from the county, they're coming from other places.
Porque el programa va a estar trabajando aquí en Oxnard.
Because the program will be working here in Oxnard.
Y el personal que va a trabajar va a vivir aquí, va a conocer cómo está el ambiente de aquí de Oxnard.
And the staff will live here, will know the environment, how things work here in the county.
Porque si mandamos a traer a otra de otro condado o de alguien más de afuera,
If
no
we
va a
bring
saber ni
someone
siquiera
else
las
from
calles
another
de Oxnard.
county, they won't even know the streets in Oxnard. They won't be familiar with them.
Y como dijo Lucas hace rato, queremos que sea, si fuera posible, que fuera una persona que salga del campo
And
para
as Lucas mentioned before, it would be good if it's someone that has already worked in the fields
que conozca realmente el lenguaje de lo que es el campo.
and that knows that language, the field language.
Porque hay muchos intérpretes, hay muchos compañeros que sí son intérpretes o hablan los 2 idiomas,
Because there's a lot of co-workers
tres
who are
idiomas.
interpreters and speak 2 or 3 languages,
pero no conocen la rama de la agricultura.
but they're not familiar with agriculture.
No saben ni qué es una caja, un carrito.
They don't know what's
Porque si hablamos de una queja, ¿verdad?
grade.
Voy a poner una queja. Y
Because
voy a
we're
decir
talking about a
que me
claim.
tropecé con el carrito, un ejemplo.
Let's say I want to say I
Entonces, el que no sabe de la lengua del campo,
step into something and they're
va a
not
pensar que
familiar with the
carritos que los
field
carros se parquean
language,
en el
like the
parqueadero.
crates or the cars that are on the field, they won't be familiar with that language,
Entonces, sí,
that vocabulary.
tenemos que encontrar a esa persona
So we have to find that person
que sepa del trabajo del campo
that knows about the work
que
in
se-
the field
y que se quede pues bajo el condado, que no
and that it stays
estoy de
in the
acuerdo
county.
que sea alguien neutral,
I agree that it's
porque
someone
también
neutral.
estamos aquí por las 2 partes, ¿verdad? De
Because
que
we're
no estamos a
talking
favor ni en
about
contra,
2
sino
parties.
que es que sea neutral, pues.
We're not in favor or
Para
against.
las 2
We
partes.
just want someone neutral for both parties.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee? Okay, from the public, Lynn. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Just on this issue, right, I mean, there's something else in the staff requirements, but we're gonna still discuss that after.
Lynn, were you speaking to the specific thing we've just been talking about, the language, or something else?
Not with the staff requirements, no.
Okay, well, let's continue a little bit more then, and then we'll call on you. Jessica yields the mic to you, Lynn.
Playing ball here. Thank you. I'm Lynn Jensen with Ventura Chemical Lab. I just had a couple of suggestions to make that I was thinking as you guys were talking, and sometimes after the issue went by. But the first one, maybe you've thought about this already, but it seems that there needs to be a really robust phone answering, recording after hours service that would be in different languages to give direction and information on what services you offer, and then also to refer out anything that might be an emergency or some kind of criminal complaint, because you don't want to really field those. You want to refer those and get people who are in an emergency situation perhaps to the right place rather than waiting for you guys to call them back if they leave a message. And so it seemed like it'd be part of the accessibility section here, just so that you would have that in these languages that people, when they call, would get the information they need to know what to do next. Second, just in speaking to what you're going to be talking about next week, which is the agreements part, I just read through this section and it was quite confusing. It talks about a good faith agreement that an employer would be required to sign, a no retaliation agreement, a resolution agreement, a no retaliation clause, and then an agreement to participate in the process, all these kinds of things that were kind of mixed up in the language. I think it's important to determine what kinds of agreements you're going to be writing and how many parties sign them. And then in the very end there, in section 7 of the resolution process guidelines, it says the staff would assist with agreed upon resolution options. So the question is then who's going to write it, who's going to help write it, and that it may mean that you need attorney services in the budget section as well, if it's going to be something that would be written by an attorney or looked at by an attorney before somebody signs it. So those are just suggestions for perhaps for the next one. And it will, I think, also help to determine what the staff would be, which staff would do which things, and how it would all work out in terms of these agreements. To me, seem like the way to really make it such that the employee and the employer would be able to trust in the process. It seems like it's really the most important part of this whole process, to make sure that people are going to enter the process and they're going to feel like they're going to get, some kind of resolution that makes sense there. And so it may mean that you need attorneys to look at it. I don't know, but in case. Thank you.
We have a wonderful subcommittee of 2 that is working exactly on this issue and these agreements, and we'll be coming back at the next meeting with that recommendation.
One attorney, one human resources / right there.
Thank you so much for our subcommittee.
And, I guess down, because I addressed that, I gotta say, I'm a little bit hesitant, because we do want agreements that make sense for people and are clear and are simple and in good faith. And maybe that's some of the challenge of why we need to ask for more time to work on them. Because I would hate to bring something like that and then it get completely torn to pieces because it doesn't have every legal implication phrase in there, and then we're going to have attorneys looking at it. So I don't know. It's a little bit of a challenge, to really think about how we want to make it in a way that's user friendly. Definitely going into the dispute resolution process, kind of what people are committing to do while they're engaging in that process, and then also that other agreement, which you would think of as a settlement agreement, what it means after when you're resolving that dispute. And so we know from from the committee and from the public that we, different components, and we've discussed those. But maybe when we edit them, I won't be here. So all the language can get changed. It's just...
Are you not going to be here at the next meeting?
No, I will. Just
Okay.
It's like, I don't know. Remove all the lawyers. When you look at the language. But maybe we can get a little bit more feedback from some other members of the committee as we go forward on that. Yeah.
I think absolutely we want the documents to be the kind of thing that are readable to the extent that neither party has to bring a lawyer with them into the room, right? And I think that's key to kind of establishing the atmosphere that we want, and to just the accessibility of the program. And I can think of plenty kind of like legal-ish documents that you sign in your life that are very readable without a lawyer, right? You start at a job and you have to sign something saying you're not going to do drugs at work, right? You are on a committee like this and you have to sign something saying you don't have any conflicts of interest and ethics violations, right? We just had our first training for our UndocuFund, clinics. All our volunteers had to sign something saying they're just going to keep confidential what people tell them in the clinic, right? Those are the kind of documents that are they're legal, but they're readable, right? You don't need a lawyer to read them. They're simple and clear, and I think that's the kind of thing we want. I did also want to speak to Lynn's comments around. I think that would be great to add around, around the telephone hotline. The voicemail recording should be in Spanish and Mixteco, and should say something like, if this is an emergency, call 911 or whatever it is.
All right. Anything more on the staff requirements for tonight?
I have a question.
Yes.
On the very last bullet point, are we absolutely, that the person has to have an insured vehicle? Does that mean that we're assuming they're going to be using their own?
I know they work for the county. We have a fleet services, so we provide vehicles
That's why I'm asking.
and insurance, but that's, again, if it's under the county. So as long as they have a valid driver's license, we could provide them a county car as needed.
So that will be revised if that's the direction we go.
Right. Okay. So dependent on the direction. All right.
Anything else?
Ellen, one more thing. So, just to throw out an idea here that may be totally about face to what we've already talked about, but I think it's somewhat related. If we can create, to me, there's two pieces to this. One is the outreach portion, in educating people on what resources are there and helping them obtain those resources as needed. And then the other part, to me, that's the simpler part. The more complicated part is this piece around conflict resolution and how it pertains to existing laws and trying to, really it's a mediator. I think we should still work towards trying to achieve that end result, because I think it's worthwhile if we can do it. If we can't do it, another way to go about that would be to simply provide tools for the employer to work this out independently from the program itself, by whether it be training or documentation on how you resolve conflict effectively, so you keep it out of this program per se because of the pitfalls that you might face in trying to get someone to resolve a conflict and you get lawyers involved. If it looks like we can't achieve it in the way that we want to, that would be another way to, continue to follow this outline that we developed early on. It's an idea, and or if the budget becomes too overblown for us to finance something like that. There are, because if you look at it from the employer's perspective, if you can convince the employer to work this out independently with their employee, to me, the carrot in that would be the fact that this agency would also be referring them to other places like Jessica or Natalia that could help them in other ways, right? So, in other words, work it out, because we're also going to be giving them a lot of information on who else they can go talk to help work it out for them. Another way to look at it, but it may also fit our charge in a different way.
I was under the impression when we did the presentation about resources for both sides that there already are certain groups providing employers with training on these things like ag safe. So I'm just not sure what providing one side of it with resources would do in terms of benefiting farm workers. I don't know if that would really balance out, the barriers in the way that we're looking for this program to move things forward,
Would the county be able to provide training, like for example, if we find a candidate that meets most of the requirements, but maybe they need training on mediation skills, is that something the county would be able to provide?
The county always offers educational incentives and encourages, continuous learning. I think mediation, I don't know how, this is for me, how, having someone that comes in and has it or doesn't have it, someone that comes in that doesn't have it, how experienced they would be, maybe because they do understand labor laws and things. There's a lot to consider within that area, and it sounds like that's a major component of at least one of the staff members to have. So I don't know, although they offer, this continuous learning and, how to expand a little bit more in their tools to say, I don't know how this committee would feel hiring someone that doesn't have a mediation background, considering how much discussion you've had regarding the resolution process, and then trust them to kind of resolve a problem without that experience and just base it on some sort of training that they recently had. So that's something to consider that I think might not work necessarily in the way that I feel the committee is looking at the staff, at least one of the staff members to have a role in, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if this committee feels comfortable hiring someone that doesn't have mediation experience and then come in and learn. I don't know how, I don't think that would necessarily feel comfortable to the parties or coming to the table,
What I'm thinking is somebody might have conflict resolution skills in, let's say, their current position, and they really understand the ag industry and they've been working with farm workers, but maybe they haven't had a formal training on mediation. So
I see.
I would think that the experience with the
they just didn't have
population.
any experience, but they have
No.
became stronger in other areas.
Right.
Having some sort of conflict resolution process, I think already puts them in a situation where they understand that environment and, kind of handling that process. So I don't know exactly the answer. I don't want to say yes to something that without human resources here, someone that could really actually give us some more information as to how critical that's going to be in that role and how it relates. Again, I know when they create the job classifications and how the two are related, they might see them as the same or they might see them as different. I don't know, so I don't want to speak and, and give you the wrong answer. But I could say, like I said, that the county very strongly encourages staff to continuously grow with their educational experience, and it is a huge thing that they
There is
push.
excuse me,
It's okay.
there is a mediation center in Camarillo. I was trained as a mediator years ago there. So there are private resources that we could access if we.
I did one at UCSB,
Yeah.
and it was a 3-day, I think, training.
And then I think beyond that, there's like kind of a professional certification for mediators too, that if you're like, say, a court-appointed mediator, you have to have
various
that.
levels, and that's why I don't want to, without myself, I don't know exactly how that would impact the job position and what, HR would classify as sufficient to meet the requirements and whatnot.
Right.
I mean, that might be something that would be good for us to weigh in on. I mean, my sense is we want someone with, like you said, it's a little more the qualitative skill of being able to kind of, mediate conflict and that kind of thing versus someone who is a professional certified mediator. I think that we don't necessarily need, but someone who's got, I think the level of mediation skill that you two probably got through the trainings you had is I would imagine, great for this kind of program.
And again, it goes into that area where it could be they have conflict resolution experience in other areas within that. And again, the desired would be, hey, you're come certified. You come, that's kind of the way that we're able to, again, not, close the opportunity necessarily in someone that could be an ideal candidate, but maybe is, lacking that one specific training, but has plenty of years of experience doing something else.
Yeah. I think what Lucas said makes sense to me. We're not really looking for a professional mediator. We're looking for a skilled facilitator who can help resolve issues and disputes. So we shouldn't get too stuck in that particular official qualification.
Yeah, I think the key is to keep it, if we can keep it simple and informal, if that's possible, then we have an opportunity for both industry and the workforce to use this service. I don't know if that's possible or not. I know that when you have advisory roles on the periphery on both sides that tend to, employers tend to go get their advice from certain areas, and if those sources do not trust the system, it's not going to be used. And that's my fear. We have to do this the right way so that, at least from the employer side, there's trust that this is a good system that is going to create value or provide value. And I think that's going to come in its simplicity. And we have to figure out a way to do that.
And on the worker side, too.
And on the worker side also.
I think that's, standing in this kind of neutral area, I think it's incumbent on both sides to promote this process and to encourage both of their constituents or, members to trust it. Both the labor advocates as well as the ag industry. And I think that's the only way it's going to work, because, you made a good reference to each side will go to their trusted sources to figure out, should I endeavor into this or should I, have you represent me at the DLSE hearing? And I think the more that all of you who are leaders with your constituents and your members can advocate that people trust and use this process, that's what's going to determine how successful it is. I was a little concerned about your comment earlier, Dave, because I wasn't quite sure what you meant by saying, whether or not something in reference to growers just trying to work things out individually as opposed to not using this program. I don't know if you were saying it as opposed to not using this program, but my red flag went up that maybe that's what you were implicating, and I wanted to ask you more about what you meant on that.
Yeah, no, I'm more, I guess what I'm trying to go back to is the original steering document that we created in that, the point of this program was to try to resolve conflict. It didn't really say how so much as it said, let's resolve conflict for the benefit of, again, a somewhat disenfranchised area of our society. And we're going to spend a lot of time focused in on this conflict resolution piece because I've done quite a bit of study just in other areas where this has been tried, and it seems to me like it always comes back to when there's a conflict that needs resolution, you're still going to have attorneys in the room. That's what I tend to see in these different programs, and if we start down that path, I think then we lose sight of what we're trying to achieve in this simplistic form, right? So I guess what I'm saying is I'm all for it if we can keep it simple and keep it utilized within the community. But I also don't think that we should discount some creative ways of achieving the same goal. Because to me personally, the bigger component of this is the outreach. It's educating people what resources are there, and in a perfect world, somebody that could handhold the process. So walk someone who may not be very well versed in trying to access these resources and walk them through the process and really advocate for their case in another agency, whether it be state, federal, or local. That to me is the real value of all this. I think the conflict resolution piece is important. My hope is we don't overcomplicate it to a point where it won't be used.
I share that with you. I mean, I really agree, and I would hope, I mean, that, ideally, it would be great to have, a clause in there, and this goes back to wanting to encourage the parties to sit down face to face at a table across from each other in this busy world where everybody has these demands, right? But to really have a ranch manager, a supervisor, an owner, an officer of the corporation sit down across from a group of employees and listen to each other to work this issue out, and to not allow attorneys into the room for either side. But if we put that into our agreement that we bring back to you next week, you know how much pushback we're going to get, and then it's going to be perceived, maybe rightly so or not, as being biased, to discriminate against growers because maybe they have more access to attorneys. I mean, there's just a whole slew, right? But I totally agree with you. I don't think attorneys should be in the room, and I think that we should require that at a certain level of supervisory, the strata, that there should be somebody there, that's maybe above the supervisor, the line supervisor. I just think they would encourage more of the creation of the trust between the employee and their employer, and a more real conversation as a representative, as opposed to representatives representing positions of each of these parties and, trying to figure out who's going to get what. So, if I bring that back in the agreement.
But I think that is kind of the intent of folks here, and that the mediation is one option that's being given in kind of the menu to the farm worker who comes in the door, right? And that the value added of that option is that it's not it's not a legal bureaucratic process. It's not an intimidating thing with lots of lawyers, right? It's a human interaction, and that there is a mediator there who's kind of helping to even the power dynamic, right? That, it's not just farm worker sitting down with the the boss, but it's there's kind of someone there. It's in this neutral space, right? All that, but that when that farm worker comes to the door, they're given kind of a set of options, and one of them is, hey, you can just anonymously let us know, and we'll make a call, to your employer, and we'll say, hey, this happened, but because you want it to be anonymous, there's not that much we can do, but here's what we will do. On the other side, there's we can help you kind of navigate the legal formal process, right? And here's this other option where we can do this kind of sit down meeting, right? And then that farm worker is then kind of able to choose which option they want to go down. But if they're choosing that mediation route, they are kind of choosing that as opposed to the kind of legal route, right?
So we have reached 8 o'clock. We're a little past. So I know we're going to continue this conversation. We've talked about things to have on our next agenda that would take us at least 4 hours. So if it's okay with you, Lucas and I will huddle with Rosa and try to figure out how to distribute these things over the next 2 meetings that we have scheduled. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Is there anyone in the public here that is burning to say something else before we adjourn? At this point, you may speak on any subject that you like.
For how long?
For no more than 3 minutes.
Me voy a ir un poquito para atrás de la junta de la vez pasada.
I want to go back to the last meeting
Sobre lo que es el empleador
about the employer
y el empleado.
and the employee.
Que yo a mi experiencia, lo que he vivido y he mirado en el campo,
From my experience,
ya
what
sea
I've
en la
lived
presa
and
o
seen
en
in the
diferentes
field,
trabajos,
in the
de
strawberry,
agricultura,
different agricultural
y
works.
que muchas veces hay conflictos porque
Sometimes there's
se
conflicts
malinterpreta lo que es el supervisor.
because there's a
O sea,
misunderstanding
un empleado va y se queja
with, let's say, an employee goes and complains about something,
Entonces, nosotros vamos con el supervisor, pero si el supervisor
we go with the
no nos
supervisor.
quiere ayudar,
But if he's not willing to help
él le
us,
puede platicar de otra manera al empleador.
he's going to
Entonces,
tell the employer
Lo que yo he
his
mirado
version
de que
in a different
salen
way.
perdiendo mucho los trabajadores en
So
ese caso.
the farm workers always lose in that case.
Entonces, yo mi sugerencia es de que el patrón
So I'm
se involucre
suggesting
más con el empleador,
that the
que
employer
dialoguen.
gets more engaged with the
Porque yo
farm
eso-
worker to have a conversation.
Eso yo lo he
a
mirado
dialogue.
con mi otro patrón, que a veces
I saw that with my
puede
other
uno tratar
employer.
mejor a veces con el patrón que con el mismo supervisor, porque a
That
veces el
sometimes you
supervisor
can deal better or come to a better
Oh.
agreement with the employer than the supervisor,
o te da la contraria, pues, y
because
o
sometimes the supervisor
inventan cosas de más y
invents
entonces le cuentan
things, things,
otra cosa al
they
patrón
go
y el
against
patrón
you,
pues,
they tell a different
pues
version
lógico
to
que
the
se la
employer,
agarra contra uno, ¿verdad? Pero
and of course it's going to get mad at
Pero
us.
sí, esa es
employer.
mi sugerencia, que este programa va a funcionar muy bien si el
Well, that's what
si
I'm
el patrón
recommending. I think this
se involucra más con
program is going to
con los
work
trabajadores.
very well if the employer gets more engaged
Porque-
with the workers.
el trabajador. Lo único que quiere es confianza,
Because the
respeto,
worker, the only thing they're looking for is
y así todos
respect,
trabajamos a gusto.
trust, and that way we can all work.
Todos salimos beneficiados,
Comfortable, we
tanto
all
como
get a
el
benefit,
empleador y el empleado.
both the employer and the
Los dos
employee.
salimos ganando así si hay un buen
We're both
trato,
winners
hay una buena motivación.
if there's a good motivation.
Entonces, es todo.
That's
Gracias.
all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone at the table? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.